To our latest Accuracy in Academia Authors Night, we do these to give you the side of the story you might not get on your own campuses, or for that matter, even your own congressional offices, dare I say. This is brought to you, as all of ours are, from a grant, a generous one, from the fine people at the Fusco Foundation, so that you can hear the information you may not have heard before. I should add, it's a very special authors night. I say that about all of them, and they are all special for different reasons, every single one of them. To those of you who've been to the ones we've had before, welcome back. To those newcomers, just welcome. Feel free to keep eating all the way through, but no ice. But tonight we have a couple of wonderful guys, the two Kens. We have a former UN ambassador and Ohio Secretary of State, currently with 3 different think tanks, all of them great, all of them doing fine work: the Family Research Council, the Buckeye Institute, and the Manhattan Institute. Did I miss one?
The American Civil Rights.
I'm getting in that one. And that would be Ken Blackwell and his co-author, Ken Klukowski, Senior Legal Advisor with the American Civil Rights Union. I didn't forget. They have the copies of this wonderful book, which we have favorably reviewed. I include it in the summer reading list, which I dare say differs markedly from that of many colleges and universities, and is available for sale, $15, and they will sign for you. I'm going to get my own sign too. And so it is our pleasure to bring to you Ken Blackwell and Ken Klukowski.
Thank you, Mal. It's a delight to be with you. I use every opportunity. What Mal didn't tell you, I used to be the mayor of Cincinnati. I was the mayor of Cincinnati after Jerry Springer, which only goes to show that sometimes the sublime follows the ridiculous. But Jerry was an interesting time under his mayoralty, and I think it was a fascinating time under mine. But I use every opportunity I can to get out of my native Cincinnati, because Mark Twain, after his 7th visit to the Queen City of the Midwest, was on a train ride out of the city, and a young reporter traveling with him asked him what his impression of the Queen City was, since he had been there now 7 times. He said, "Son, if I heard the world was ending tomorrow, I would get to Cincinnati as fast as I could, because things happen there 10 years after they happen in the rest of the world." we are really conservative in Cincinnati. Let me just share with you some opening thoughts that inspired Ken Klukowski and I in our pursuit of what we thought to be an emerging blueprint that Team Obama was following to substantially, and let me say radically, transform our country. He had promised that 5 days before his election in November of 2008. He said with great clarity that we were 5 days away from transforming the United States of America. And since his inauguration, he and his team have been on a mission to do just that. Now, the title of our book is The Blueprint: Obama's Plan to Subvert the Constitution and Build an Imperial Presidency. That is a very provocative title. Let me first tell you what it is not. It does not say that the president is evil. It does not say that the president is a tyrant. We say subvert, which is to undermine the principles of. And we talk about an imperial presidency, which is a way of saying that Team Obama is determined to change the balance of power achieved through the separations of power and our American federalism. He is attempting to concentrate power in the executive branch, giving him the power of a monarch. Now, I think that that is exactly what the founders were concerned with when they framed the Constitution. And so the Constitution is the big boulder in the road that will prevent the president and his team from executing this power grab. And so our book not only details how they are subverting the Constitution, but what we must do to maintain a constitutionally based Republican form of democracy, where the people remain sovereign and the ultimate boss, and not the servants of the executive branch or the central government located here in Washington, D.C. We start from a very fundamental understanding of the Declaration of Independence, which we believe is the frame within which the Constitution rests. And the second paragraph of that Declaration of Independence is at the heart of the frame. We hold these truths to be self-evident, which is a very kind Midwestern way of saying any idiot should get this. That we hold these truths to be self-evident. That we are all men, women, children, human beings. We're endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, which means that our rights don't come from grants of government or grants from government. They are part and parcel of our human dignity. They are gifts from God. And so that we start from an understanding that there is not a government on the face of the earth that can give you your human rights. That these rights are gifts from our Creator. And it means that no matter how tall you are, how poor you are, how rich you might be, how smart you might be, how lacking you might be in any measure of intelligence or wealth, by the very nature of your human existence, you have these basic rights, and they are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, we think that they are given in that particular order. It is very difficult to pursue liberty if you're dead. And it's very difficult to pursue happiness if, in fact, you're not free. And that is the heart of what we are about. Preserving life, innocent life, and preserving freedom. Now, what we lay out in the blueprint, and Ken will take you through it, are specific actions by the Obama administration to do certain things. First, to confuse as to where our rights come from. They do this by trying to chase God and faith out of the public square. They would have us worship at the altar of the state as opposed to worshiping our God and our Creator. We watch how they use, in their first 2 years, how they've used executive powers and executive regulations to get over legislative actions or around legislative actions and mandates of the Congress. We've watched them use czars to, in fact, run like Carol Browner and the whole attempt to take over the energy sector. We've watched them pack the administration with folks with extraordinary power exercising this power outside of the purview of the Congress, the representatives of the people. But what Ken and I have really focused on, because we know that the Constitution is the challenge, is Team Obama's plan for the courts. They have a plan to pack the courts with judicial activists, folks who believe that policy should be made by the courts as opposed to the courts interpreting the Constitution. Folks like Goodwin Liu, who has said it publicly, that he believes that any judge that believes in the original intent of the Constitution is not fit to be a justice on the Supreme Court. Justices like Sotomayor, Associate Justice Sotomayor, who said in a candid moment that the appellate court is where policy is made. She in fact exposed their game plan in that one statement. During her confirmation hearing, she tried to back away from it, but she actually had pulled the veil back off of their intent. Because what she said, in addition to saying that's where policy was made, she laid out just why that was. And that is that if you have judges at the appellate court level making public policy, and given that the Supreme Court only hears about 1% of the cases that are adjudicated by the appellate level, it means that they can affect, even if they don't control the Supreme Court, they can, if they control the appellate court level, they can make public policy and change the nature of governance at that level. So we saw this, and at CPAC, I don't know how many of you all attend CPAC, but at CPAC in 2009, I gave a talk about the paragraph that we saw unfolding in the infancy of the Obama administration. The reaction was so positive, so intense that Ken and I said, we have to do the book. And we were ready to do the book, but we got extra energy when Newsweek magazine in 2009 ran a cover story entitled, "We're All Socialists Now." Well, the heck we are. And that is why we wrote the book. I'll let Ken take you through some of the analysis that we do and some of the chapter by chapter, and we're opening it up to questions. But the reality is that at the end of the day, as a sovereign people, there are two routes. Really, there are probably four places where we affect broad change, transformational change in this country. We can do it through direct political action, like the Tea Parties all across this country, and energized citizens who in fact are engaged in the political process, many for the first time, and many for the first time in a long time. In the courts, and Ken and I focused on that, in the legislative bodies of the states, and in defense, whether it's Arizona or Virginia, governors and state legislatures are starting to understand that if they don't exercise their rights and their independence, guaranteed to them by the Constitution, that they are just going to be steamrolled by our all-powerful central government. The streets, the courts, the legislative body, and the fourth place is in the minds and hearts of our fellow countrymen and women. We've attempted to put together a book that can speak in all of those arenas. And we think if we can do that, we lay out a counter plan to the blueprint that can lead us to an America that maintains its exceptional status in the world. 234 years, my fellow countrymen and lovers of freedom, we have become the most prosperous, the freest people in all of human history. We are exceptional. While we're not perfect, we are exceptional. And that exceptionalism is at risk. And in that risk, our freedom is at risk. The blueprint details what the opponents of individual liberty are out to do. And we hope that not only our prescriptions, but the prescriptions that are in your hearts and your minds lead you to be part of a force that counters that effort, and in the end is victorious in helping us to remain the exceptional nation that we have been for 234 years in America's third century.
Well, thanks for coming out. To build on what Ken said, the thing that we did in this book is that a lot of people were coming out saying that what President Obama is doing is bad, as in counterproductive policy. That economic policies would cost jobs, not create them, that it would impoverish families, not enrich them, and that in so many different areas, whether it was healthcare, private businesses, bailouts, or social issues, that the policies that were being implemented were counterproductive to the long-term best interest of the United States. What we felt the need to say, because not enough other people were, is what this president is doing is not just wrong policy. It's illegal. It's unconstitutional. The Constitution of the United States is the supreme law of the land in this nation. As such, we go into the introduction, the fundamental difference between state governments and the federal government. States are what are called governments of general jurisdiction. That means they have what's called the police power. That's the power to make laws for public health, public safety, public morality, social order, general welfare. The federal government, in contradistinction to that, is not a government of general jurisdiction. It's a government of limited jurisdiction. That means it has no police power. It has only what's called enumerated powers or delegated powers. Meaning every single action of the federal government, legislative, executive, or judicial, anything that any organ of the national government does must be traceable and authorized by a specific provision of the U.S. Constitution. If not, it is automatically, irreversibly, and irredeemably illegal. It is inherently illegitimate. It is inherently unlawful. The reason there being that we, the people, created a sovereign union of states. And then we, the people, took from the states certain narrow areas of power, invested them in a national government. Everything else under the 10th Amendment is either reserved to the states or to the people of the United States. And so for us, it was a constitutional critique. Not just to say the federal government should not take over health care, which from a policy perspective it should not. Government takeover of health care leads to impoverished care, less care, people literally do suffer. But it's not just saying that the federal government should not take over the healthcare industry because it'll be bad for our citizens. It's to say that the requirement, the cornerstone of the healthcare bill, which is the individual mandate that every person in this room, unless you have a bona fide religious objection, or unless you fall below a certain poverty line, every person in this room must purchase a certain form of health insurance or you will be under penalty of law by the federal government. Not only is that bad policy, that's illegal. The Constitution does not allow the federal government to do that. So we lay out why. We talk about the czars. We talk about the Constitution sets up a system where within the executive branch, all executive power is vested in the president. But in the Appointments Clause, it says that among other executive branch officers, inferior officers can be, as designated by Congress, be appointed directly by the president or by department heads or by the courts. But that principal officers or senior officers of the government must be nominated by the president and confirmed by the U.S. Senate. Without that, they can exercise no lawful authority over any of us. Yet this president has set up a whole regime of czars running a shadow government out of the White House. Now, you'll get all sorts of pushback on that. Like, well, didn't other presidents have czars? Well, yes and no. That's why we start off the chapter by defining what a czar is. Like, there are people who talk about the Director of National Intelligence as the intelligence czar. It's not a czar. The DNI is created by act of Congress. It's a Senate-confirmed official. Call him a czar all you want, but he's not a czar. Other so-called czars are advisory in nature. People say, what about the drug czar? Again, an office created by Congress, confirmed by the U.S. Senate. But when you have, Ken mentioned Carol Browner, an open and avowed socialist, a former board member of the political action arm of Socialist Party International. That's not me calling it a socialist organization. That's it calling itself a socialist organization. She is the energy czar, an office never created by Congress, a person never confirmed by the U.S. Senate, not subject to congressional oversight, who has complete authority over the EPA and the Energy Department, complete control over the U.S. energy sector in our environment. You had the communist Van Jones that Glenn Beck managed to chase out of the White House by just taking the guy's words and putting them on the screen. And the list goes on. This president has over 24 czars. We talked about healthcare. We go into the book in over 20 different issues. We talk about elections. We talk about immigration. We talk about how this president is trying to use these things to fundamentally reconstruct the political landscape in this country to help make sure he can keep getting the votes he needs for his party to stay in power, to let the cement dry on the agenda of what they're doing for this country. We talk about the restriction of flow on information. Whether it's a dozen new versions of the Fairness Doctrine to try and destroy conservative talk radio, whether it's a war on the media, such as going on national TV and saying that Fox News Channel, a 24-hour news network, is somehow not really news. Or whether it's an issue of throwing off the plane certain journalists that are covering the White House in an unfavorable manner. People can only act on the information that they have. Whether it's executive action, the Constitution, once again, says that all legislative power at the federal level is vested in Congress. Now, the executive is able to promulgate regulations to implement Congress's laws. But regulations cannot be used constitutionally to create new policy. Yet we see that with cap and trade, the legislation having stalled in the Congress, the EPA administrator came out and said, well, if they don't pass a law, we'll just declare it through executive regulations. Something that would have an economic impact of perhaps 5 times what the Obamacare law does, to the tune of $2 trillion a year on the U.S. economy by executive fiat. With card check legislation stalls in Congress. That's okay. He finds some law professors that say, you know what, we think the National Labor Relations Board could just vote to do it all by executive regulation. Then during a recess, he appoints 2 of those people to the NLRB. 1 vote shy of just being able to declare it all by executive fiat. Now, all of the things that I've laid out can be challenged in court. In fact, as a lawyer, I'm one of the lawyers involved in the constitutional challenges to the Obamacare law. Involved in some other constitutional cases as well, because this administration can keep a constitutional lawyer pretty busy. But what we see in over 20 different areas, you know, presidents are prone to do unconstitutional things. That's why we have a separation of powers and checks and balances. It is the purpose of the judiciary to hold in check legislative or executive actions that trample on the Constitution. But the Constitution's only as good as the Supreme Court that interprets it. And that's why the theme throughout our book, as Ken mentioned, is that this president is seeking to hack the federal courts. Now, the big questions get up to the Supreme Court. But as Ken said, the Supreme Court only takes about 80 cases a year, and that's perhaps the right number, out of over 8,000 cases offered to it. You know, Judge Reinhardt on the Ninth Circuit, who is notoriously soft on criminal defendants, was asked some time ago where, once again, a panel he was on voted to let a guy off. And a reporter came and said, you know, the Supreme Court has recently said that you can't do that. You know, why do you keep doing this? And he said, well, they can't catch them all. That was his answer to the reporter. They can't catch them all. In other words, they've only got 80 spots on their docket. They're only going to dedicate so many of them to the actions of Steve Reinhardt on the Ninth Circuit. They have another 13, they have a total of 13 federal appellate courts and 50 state Supreme Courts that they have to be dealing with. Now, that's an issue where it shows, as Ken said, the value of this president stacking the appellate courts with far-left judicial activists, like Goodwin Liu, who said he supported a filibuster of John Roberts or Sam Alito for the Supreme Court because anyone who believes that they should be bound by the words of the Constitution is so simplistic in their understanding, such a Neanderthal who clearly does not realize the essence of the law, that they are manifestly unfit to wear a robe on the bench. Now that doesn't just say, I have a far left view of the law. That says I have such a militant view of the law that I think that people who don't share my beliefs have no business presiding over cases. Yet he's been nominated to the Ninth Circuit. From his resume, it's clear that he's being groomed on the short list for a future Supreme Court appointment. Another is Judge Shotney, been nominated to the Second Circuit. Notoriously soft on convicted criminals, who specifically had one case where